especially today, but in this book has been out a week, and it's quite astonishing. I thought there was no news in it because I was essentially just fleshing out my article in the Walrus magazine, but apparently it is news to some people, and just mentioning the word religion tends to get tempers raised. My worst critics have all said it's a polemic, and what's interesting is they all sort of let slip that they haven't read it. So if you've read it, you know that it's not a polemic. I actually refused jobs as a job as a movie reviewer because I didn't want to inflict my opinions on other people, and I was never too sure what they were. But I am a reporter. I can't resist the lure of facts, of the connections that you can make to show behind the scenes. And during the free trade agreements and negotiations, I wrote a book on the backstage lobbyists and some of the interests that had the government of the time's ear. So why wouldn't I want to do now an examination of who has this government's ear? I don't have an axe to grind. And what's interesting is the government's communication strategy, back to Donald's thesis. In dealing with this book, I was in Ottawa, and it's totally coincidentally that this book was released the same day as the National Prayer Breakfast. And in fact, we had discovered this because I discovered it by accident. I was replying to my invitation because I've gone to the last few years, and I thought it would be good to keep up to date and know what's happening. And then I suddenly realized, I'm busy that day. I have a book launch in Toronto. I can't go. So I mentioned it to the Random House people, and the word got out. And anyway, there'd been so much publicity by the time last Tuesday only, rolled around, the day of the prayer breakfast, that the chapter's display on Parliament Hill was decimated by eager buyers, perhaps not fans of mine, but interested readers. So only a day later, the same night I was on the National, Wendy Mesley did one of the in-depth segments they do. And it was a really tough interview. She had me meet her in a church, which seemed kind of odd to me, because she walked in and it was as if I was the warden or something, as if I was always hanging out there. And so anyway, she was really tough. She must have tried 6 or 7 different ways to get me, essentially to say that Stephen Harper, has this secret agenda, or he's on Pat Robertson's payroll, or he's burning incense in the basement at 24 Sussex Drive. And, in fact, I was saying just the opposite. I don't think he's a natural Christian conservative. He's an evangelical, and whatever his beliefs are his own private matter, but he's a cerebral Christian if he's anything, and I think going back to his history and reform, he's not terribly comfortable with the most emotional elements of this community. But it is a strategy. It's a concerted strategy, and probably the first time in Canada that a political party has used religious and moral issues as a party-building strategy. And my thesis is just that this is a very rocky road, slippery slope to go down, because you open up the sort of factionalism and pitting one kind of Christian against another, one faith against another. It's something to be thought out very carefully. In any event, a day after, I'm still in Ottawa, this Wendy Mesley segment aired, the Conservative Party, you may or may not have heard about this, issued a letter to supporters that was leaked to Jane Tabor in the Globe and Mail, and it appeared on her blog. People kept saying, it's not in print, it doesn't have to be in print. Instantly, it's across the country. And the CBC letter criticized the CBC, or the Conservative Party letter, criticized the CBC for fanning a faith war by featuring my book on a full 8-minute segment. As Jane Tabor pointed out, they must have had a stopwatch. And the letter was very clever, because it put the CBC on the defensive and essentially said this is another example of that dread CBC and taxpayers' funds being wasted on criticizing the government and essentially, adding to a long-time war against the CBC for defunding. And so it did make CBC people very defensive. In my next interview on the CBC, not only was really tough, and people said, if I thought Wendy Mesley was tough, I had not anticipated Evan Solomon saying, "Why are you doing this to Christians? And why are you singling out people?" Anyway, that's fine. It's a fair question, and I'm a big girl. I have to explain where I come from. But what he didn't tell me was when he taped it on the Thursday that he would feature a panel, what he called a panel, the next, when they ran it the next day, and one of the panelists was Ezra Levant, who called me a bigot and a freak. And after I got over my momentary rush to the phone book to call a lawyer, and then I realized he is a lawyer. He has free legal services. I don't. I thought, then on Saturday's National Post, you may or may not have seen it, David Frum wrote a scathing denunciation of the book and called me an anti-Semite. And as far as he was concerned, the whole book must be anti, the Middle East policy of this government. In fact, very little of the book is devoted to that, and surely any inquiring mind or reporter has a right to trace the development of a huge change in Canadian foreign policy. I mean, whether you agree with it or not is up to voters to decide, not me. But I find most people don't understand that it is a policy of the courting Christian Zionists by Israel that was a very, very clever and effective policy. So with this letter, the Conservative Party, I'd love to fan myself too, it's so warm in here. They intimidated the CBC. They also took a swipe at Liberals because this was an example of the strategy that Frank Graves, the Liberal pollster, had counseled the Liberal Party to use, Michael Ignatieff to use, to dwell on wedge issues. Well, Michael Ignatieff had never said a word about my book. He may hate it, I don't know, but he hadn't said a word. He wasn't implicated in this, but they sure were not going to rush to my defense, so they were implicated. And very indirectly, well, not very indirectly, they implicated me, and I thought they'd shut me up. Well, as my husband can tell anyone, that takes a bit, but... And so since then, we've seen two friends of Harper, former political colleagues, Ezra and David Frum, both be used as the attack dogs. And particularly the David Frum attack outraged some of my friends of many faiths, but they wanted to write letters and say she'd just been at our seders, for heaven's sakes, and this is not so. And I said, don't write letters, don't implicate yourselves. And besides, he just proved my point. In the book, I talk about the prospect of you using religion and moral issues as a political tool, as an organizing tool, and the perils therein, that you open yourself to the sort of political dialogue that we see now in the United States, and the roots of the Tea Party movement, some of the organizers lie in the religious right. It's not, I think, a tone that we would want to see imported here. I thought I was warning about a development that was 30 years down the road. That's how long the religious right in the United States has taken to mature to this point. What Ezra and David Frum just proved to me was that I underestimated the speed at which this is picking up. This development may already be here.